So you're welcome to our class for today, and for today we are going to begin our course on Backend Development. So for today's class we are going to be learning an introduction to Backend Developer, and once again my name is Amadi Chile. We are two instructors, so in time you get to see another instructor, but for today's class I will be your instructor. So who is a backend developer? A backend developer is the brain of application. He handles the logic, the data, and communication with the database. And the database, in our own case, will be MongoDB. That is the cloud location where the user information will be stored, like the login details, the email, password, so that when a user wants to log in, the application will remember those details. Now the front-end developer is a developer that designs a part of the website or application that user get to see and interact with, like the home page, the login page. So what tools are we going to be using for this course? We are going to be using Node.js, VS Code, and Postman. So those are some of the tools that we are going to be using. Now before we begin, it is recommended that you have an average knowledge of JavaScript. So just to remind you of those, in case it's been a while since you wrote JavaScript, you're going to do a brief brush up of JavaScript. Some of the most important concepts that we'll be needing in our backend. For example, we're going to review how we declare variables in JavaScript. We're going to also review how we write functions, CSS features like let, cons, arrow functions, and template headers. We're also going to talk about arrays and objects. So with this brush up, then we'll be set for our next class, where we'll be using Node.js. So the JS stands for JavaScript, so that's why you need a basic or an average knowledge, not a basic, an average knowledge of JavaScript, so that by the time we start applying JavaScript in our Node.js, you will be more comfortable with it. So if for any reason you don't have any knowledge of JavaScript, just bear in mind that it doesn't mean that you cannot understand Node.js or the backend. The only issue or the only problem or the work for you is that you have to spend more time practicing. So once you ask questions in class, you see the void that need to be filled, you go to WT School JavaScript and practice before the next class. And since our class is going to be once a week, so you have a lot of time to practice and do your project. So not having any knowledge of JavaScript does not mean that you cannot learn Node.js, but it just requires more work for you at the beginning to fill in those gaps. So with that said, I already sent some links to you on how to download and install Node.js, VS Code, and Postman. So assuming you've done that, I'm going to start with mine. So in case you have not done that, please just go back to the group chat. You're going to see the link. So this is the folder where I want to work for today's class. Like you see, it's class 1. So the folder is empty, so I'm going to open this on my VS Code. So if you're using Windows, if you install your VS Code correctly, then you should see this VS Code icon when you right click on it on a folder. So if you click this, it's going to open VS Code. But in case you don't see it, then you have to, there's another method you can use. So let's show you the method. We are going to use the terminal method. So I'll just still the same right click, open my terminal. So if you're using Windows 11, this will not be an issue for you. So I just write code space dot, so excuse me, and this will open our project in VS Code. So just confirming that the recording is in process. Okay, so since we have our VS Code open, then the next thing for us to do is to create two files that we can use to practice our JavaScript from the front end part. We can use Node.js, but just to give you a feel of the learning environment, especially if you don't have a basic knowledge. That's why I'm using this method and not Node.js. So now I'm going to right click this, create a file called index.html. So we need this so that we can read our JavaScript from the front end. So I use a shortcut that VS Code gives us, exclamation mark, and I'll hit enter. So I'll create another file called index.js. so this is our JavaScript file. So we are going to link it to this, so we can run our JavaScript from the web browser. Now without Node.js, you cannot run your JavaScript outside of a browser. So that is why we need this. So I'll just make a comment and put link external JS. So to do that, in a HTML file, I need the script tag. So I'm trying to use shortcuts, so to save time, let me type it script. I need the source attribute. So here I'm going to load the path to the JS file, which is ./index.js. So I close that. So that works. So now I can change this if you want. So we are done with this. I'm going to save. Now how do we show this on our browser? So there's a live extension method you can use. So I'll right click and open with the live server. This live server makes it possible for us for our web browser to automatically refresh once we save. So if you don't have the live server, you come to this extension tab, you type live server, and you're going to download the one by retweak there, live server. So once you install it by retweak there, so once you install it, then you're going to have that feature. So that is it. So I'll right click and open with my live server. So now we have our live server opened. There's nothing there. So how do we test if our external JS has been linked to our HTML file. So we're just going to use an alert function.
Yes, well,
Okay, thank you. It's like it's closing time.
yes,
If I've tried.
thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to write a message. Say hello world. So if I do this and save and go back, let me just refresh to find out. Okay, so that means there is a mistake with this index.js. Let me load my browser again, my live server again, just to be sure. /index .js script. Okay, so let me type this again. Oh, sorry. So now I've seen the error. SROCRI and I put SAR. So that was the error. Index.html, .js. So that was the error. So now we have our hello world. So this means we can begin learning the basics of our JavaScript. So the first concept that we'll learn today, according to our slide, is variable declaration. So how do we declare a variable in JavaScript? Variable. So a variable is just okay. So what is a variable? A variable is simply a box in a computer memory where it can store information. Say I want to remember a name called Chile. I need a container, I need a box, and that container can be var first name equal to Chile. So the value inside the box is Chile, and the name of the container of the box is first name. So whenever I want to get what is inside this box, I will reference it with this first name. So let's check that out by using a console.log first name So if I do that, save. So this time we don't have an alert, so we need to open the developers mode. So I'll right click, go to my inspect. Then click this double arrow in case there's no space to see my console chile. So in order for me to see my output in real time, I need to minimize this screen. Then I also minimize this. So if I shrink this a little, so if I shrink this a little, I'm going to see this. Then okay, so let me open my inspect mode again. Let me expand this just to be sure. Console. Let me change the console display type, so I'll change it to this, so that it's always on the screen. Then I'll drag this, so that way when I minimize, I'm going to see it like this. Okay, so we have this now. So that is what a variable is. Now this type of variable is called string. So in JavaScript we have the following data types. So we have string, in my position, string, we have number, we have boolean, we have, let's say, array. So array and object, they are still the same thing, but to split them we have object and also have class, but we'll not touch that. So when you want to declare a variable, you need a keyword, which can be var, let, and const. You need the variable name, which is like the box. You need an assignment operator if you have a value to assign to it. So the value here is chile. So this is a string. Now a string in JavaScript is any value that is inside a single or double quote. So if I come here and say var last name should be Amadi. Then I come down here, I duplicate and say last name. So I'll have that as a string. Now in JavaScript, there's a way you can check if it's a string or a number. So I have console.log type of first name. So if I do the same thing for last name, so you notice that whether it's a single quote or a double quote does not change the fact that it's still a string. Now there's another way that we can also declare a string. I also have a full name. So I have this, so I'll say first name space last name. Now this is the backtick, and you can find this above your tab key or below your escape key. So one of the advantage of using backtick in JavaScript is it helps you to dynamically add dynamic values into a string. So if I was to use the normal string concatenation, this process would be very, very stressful. So that is just one of the advantage. So if I do the same thing here and I say full name, you see that it doesn't change the fact that it's still a string. So whether it's in double quote, in single quote, or in backtick, as long as the value or the variable is inside something, inside a quote, then it returns a string. Now we also mentioned that in ES6, according to our slide here, we have two other methods of declaring a variable, let and const. So why did these two methods come into play? And we need to understand it because we will not be using var in our backend, and this explanation will help us to understand that. So one thing about var is it doesn't know any scope, so it has a scoping problem. Now all these variables that are here, because they are not inside any curly bracket, they are all global variables, meaning that if I declare another variable inside the curly bracket, I can still access them and there will be no error. But for var, whether I declare it inside the variable, inside the curly bracket or not, I can still access it. So it's not nice. So to show you the scope problem, say I come here again. Let's say I want to change this name. Say I forgot that. Okay, let's say I want to change this name. Instead of it to be Chile, it should be Ben. So if I say var first name is equal to string of Ben, and I save this, you notice there is no error on the console, and everything just shows like that. And if I do this as my full name, you notice that just update. So but this is a problem. There is a problem here because I've already declared this variable here. I'm also declaring the same variable and assigning a new value. There's no error here. So the problem with this is that, say you're writing a big application that has, let's say, 100 lines or 2000 lines, and you want your first name to always be a string and to have a value, okay, to always be a string, and I come here now and change this to 4. There's no error. And let's say you want your first name to always be a string, and somehow a typo error, you have a sleepy eye, and you change this to a number, and because you've already said you want your first name to always be a number, see that can crash your application, and it might take you some time to debug the application. So because of this, var is not good. Now what I'm actually trying to do here is to update the value. Update. So when I want to update a value, I don't need to redeclare it again as a new container. I just want to remove what is inside that container and place a new one inside. So I don't need this var. So if I remove this var, the application still works. So now let's try this with let. So for let's say I change this to let, and I come back here and I want to do the same thing with that I did with var. So I'll say let this. You notice I have an error, and if I hover, I say cannot declare block scope variable. So because they are in the same scope, I cannot use the same variable name the same time. But if I change this to anything like 2, you see that the error is gone. So with var, it helps you, with let, it helps you not to reuse a variable name that you have used before and to avoid this mistake. But for let, if I want to update the variable, I must omit the let keyword, then I can update that variable. So that has been taken care of. So this is why we use our let. Now what about const? Let's try that with const. So const, and let's say I want to do the same thing I did with my var. I say const. So the same error will show, cannot redeclare block scope variable. So that means I cannot try this. So what about this? Will it work? Can I update a constant variable? The answer is no. And why is that? Because just like the name, constant, it then means that throughout my application, I don't want this first name to change. So it then means that container, I've only created it to store a value called Chile. So at no time that application will JavaScript allow me to update it. So let's see if the theory actually works. So if I save this, you notice it will show me an error. Uncut type error, assignment to constant variable at this. So I cannot update a constant variable. So that is just the difference. So what is the rule that you should remember? When you're declaring a variable, always use let. If you know that at some point in the application the variable will change, the value will change. But if you know that at no point in your application should that variable change, you want it to always be constant, you use let. So in this application we're going to use let. So let's say I want to declare a value for pi. I know that pi is 20/7, so I can just put I can do it anywhere. I can say let, I can say const pi should be equal to 22/7. So if I do this constant.log pi, so I'll have that. So you notice I have my pi. So that is how we declare a variable. So remember, only use let when you know that the value will change at some point in your application or at any time in your application. Always use const if you want that value to remain constant throughout your application. So now that we know how to declare a variable, the next concept that I want to review is how to create a function. So we are going to review how to create a function. So when do we need function in JavaScript or in any programming language? We need a function when we want to avoid repeating a code, because a function is a block of code that does a particular action. So once you got that action, the function exit and stop running. So a function should do a particular thing: to sum a number, to subtract a number, to find the factors of a number, or to add the first name and the last name as full name, or to find the initials of a number. So that is when you need a function. So let's say, for example, in our application we want to get the initials of a user. So if we know the first name and the last name, we want to return initial. Like, say the first name is Chida and last name is Amade, so the initial will be CA. So let's say we want to do that. Now if we don't want to use a function, it then means if we have like 100 users, I need to write different 100 logic for each unique user to find their word initial. So that's why we need a function. So now for us to avoid repeating that process, so how do we create a function? So there are two ways. The first way is using the function keyword. Then the second way is the exist method or arrow function. So we are going to write the same function using both methods. So the first way is function get initials. So to do that, I need to accept two arguments or two values. So I'll say first name and I'll put last name. Now if you are wondering why this didn't throw an error, it's because this first name here and this last name here, they are local variables, so they are inside a curly bracket, so it's not the same thing with this one. Then I'm going to return what's equals to console.log. So the first name, we are going to use this backtick method. So in JavaScript, to get the first value in a string, we just say first name, then we use our square bracket 0, then the same thing, last name, we use our square bracket 0. So this is going to console.log the first name, the initials of a first name, or whatever two string I put there. So let's run this application. I'm going to have so because we already have a console.log here, we don't need a console.log to see our value. So what I need to do now is to call a function. So when you declare a function, it doesn't start working. It's like when you buy a generator, the generator doesn't start to work unless you on it. So once you on a generator, if you don't off it after a time, once the fuel gets finished, it pops. So that is how a function is. Once you create it or you buy it and keep, it just remains there waiting for you to use it. If you don't use it, it remains like that. So now I'm going to call a function. So I'm going to say get functions. So I'm going to put the first name. I'm going to put so yeah, I can decide to use a variable if I want, but let's start a variable. I can put first name, last name. Now remember, this first this first name and last name, they are these ones I've declared above. So let's see how this works. So if I save this, I'm going to get undefined A. So why am I getting undefined name A? Oh, because my first name is T4 and that is not a string. So let me remove this update by cancelling it out. So we have CA. So let's test it out. So let's assume I don't want to use those ones above. Let me say I use Ben. So we have BA. So if I have like 1,000 users, I don't need to write different 1,000 unique code to get their initial. I just need to use the same function, then pass in their first name and their last name, and I will get their initial. So that is how we use a function. It helps us to avoid repeating code. Now let's say I don't want to just display this value. I want to get it and use it for another stuff first before I display. So to do that, I need to return a value from a function, and to do that I just need to remove this console.log and put return. Then I'll remove this ending bracket. So if I do this, we're not going to see our value on the console. So remember, the console helps us to test our JavaScript if it is correct or not. So I'm going to put here, let user initials equal to this. So now I can see my console.log user initials. So if I do that, I'm going to see that here. So let's write the same function using the arrow function method. So I will say get initials to, sorry, I will select, well, I can use const get initials to equal to this. I'll put my first name, last name, then return. So because it's the same logic, so there's no need to waste time, just copy that and paste here. So I'll have this. So why are we having error? Yes, this is meant to be an arrow function, so this is meant to be here. And if this is here, no, this is meant to be equal to the arrow function. The arrow is meant to be here. Okay, so that is that. So if you notice, this first part is as if you're declaring a variable, then this other part is now the function part. So if you don't observe it well, you also forget and you get that error, because by default you might want to write this even though your intention is to write this. So I hope it just take note. It's like you're declaring a variable, then after the assignment operator you have your bracket. If it doesn't accept any parameter, then you leave it empty, then you return what you want to return. So now this will also give us the same results. So if I can also do it like console.log get initials to, so So I can put here John Doe. So this will return JD. So that works. So this is how we declare a function in JavaScript. So with that, we can move to another concept that we need in our JavaScript. So before we learn that concept is called destructuring. So before we learn it, let us review our array. So an array is a variable that can hold more than one value. So if you recall, the variables that we have been declaring holds one value. Now, even though a string can hold as many paragraphs as you want, technically it's still one value. So if I declare, let's say, let A equal to A, for example, then let B, so let's just declare the different type of variable, and I put 4, and I say let is A equal to true. So let me make this one more real. Let is logged in true. So all these things, they are all one value. So even if I change this to let message error, please try again, it's still one value. So even though this is 404, it's still one value. So a perfect scenario to help us appreciate when we need an array is, for example, let's say I have a user. So let's say you are creating a backend and you need to store the following user information. You need the user first name, the last name, and let's say the email. So without an array, that can look like this. So let user name be equal to user first name be equal to, let me use Chile again, let user last name be equal to Amadi. So let user email be equal to chile@gmail.com. So this is not my real email. So if I want to store more user information, you notice I'm going to create all of this, and this is just for one user. So imagine if I have 100 users, 1000 users. So the process will be time consuming and hard to maintain. So instead of doing this, you can use an array, because an array makes sense if the values that I want to save, they are all related. Like you notice here is user first name, user last name, user email. So instead of doing this, we can do something like this. Const user info equal to an array. So I can have a string here of the first name is Chile, and the last name is Amadi, and the email is chile@gmail.com. So this is how we declare an array. So how do I get the first name and the last name from an array list? So what you need to remember in an array is this, that the items in an array, you get them by knowing their index. So for here I have index 0, index 1 and index 2. So to get Amadi I need to use index 1. So console.log user info, use my square bracket 1. That means I'm going to get Amadi. So but how do we know the length in an array? So you can say console.log user info dot length. So once you go to your W2 school, you're going to see so many ways you can interact with your array. So let's say I want to check if Amadi exists in this user info. So I also need to use my user info. So with array we can loop through the items to either search for things or to do something and then return another value. So I can use a loop. So .user info dot for each. So I'm going to use item, then I will say if item, if it contains Amadi, then console.log Amadi item exists in user info. So let's try this and see if it works. So if I do this, say Amadi exists in user info. So what if I want to search for a capital letter Amadi? So remember, JavaScript is case sensitive, so that is not there. So if I want to return an error, so console.log user info not found, user info not typing fast makes error not found. So that is how we can do that. But there's a JavaScript method that makes checking if an item exists in an array much easier than this. So another method that we can do this is using the include method. So I can just say console.log user info dot includes Amadi. So if it includes Amadi, capital Amadi, it's going to return true. But because there's no capital Amadi here, it's going to return false. So only if I make this small letter, so it's going to return true. So once you go to W2 school, you can play around many other array methods I can use. But we want to move now to our object. Now you notice from the explanation of an array, it stores different value using index. So if you know the index, you can get the value. So if you don't know the index, that is when you have to search to get the index. So say for example, I don't want to use this include. There's another one you can use called index of. So what this does is, if you find the value, you return, it gives you the index of that value. So remember, Amadi is in index 1, so it's going to return 1 since it was there. So if it's not there, say I put A, it's going to return -1, meaning it couldn't find that value. So if you don't know the index, you have to search then text. But even though you know the, let's say I know the index today that Amadi is in index 1, but I come another day, unknown to you, a new value has been added, and I put here as, let's say, age, just put 12, save. So Amadi will no longer be index 1. Instead of it to return Amadi, it's now returning Chile. So if I save this, so instead of returning index 1, it's going to return index 2. So you see that. So with an array, if a new value is added from the start of the array, then the index that was there before will change. So that means knowing the index is not a guarantee that you always find that value. If you also delete an item from the array from the start, it also affects the index too. So object solves that problem for us. It then means that once I know the index, the position where the item is does not matter unless the item does not exist at all. So as long as it exists, the index where the index does not, although for an object it doesn't use index, it uses key. So once you know the key, you can actually get the value as long as the value exists. So if the value does not exist, then there will be no key. So that is one way that object solves the problem for us. So with the same problem, let's create it with an object. So an object is also a variable that stores more than one value, but instead of using index value pairs, it uses key value pairs. That way, whether I add a new item from the beginning or from the end, as long as that property of the object exists, I always get that value. So object. So how do you create an object in JavaScript? So I will just say user const profile this. So now instead of using just 12, Chile, Amadi, and the email, so I'll just make it more descriptive. So I'll say first name, I'll put this as Chile. So you see that when you are using an object, it describes the value more than when you're using an array. So last name, Amadi. Then we have email, chile@gmail.com. So now, how do we get Amadi from an object? Very simple. Just say consider.log. Put your object name, profile dot the last name, which is Amade. So if I do this, I will get Amade. So now what if I add age at the top? Remember, we did the same thing with our array and we got another value. Let's say age, and I put 12. Now you notice that the addition of age here does not prevent me from getting Amade, the last name, as long as it exists. So let's try that. So you see, so when you use an object, it helps you don't have that problem of memorizing the index or worrying if a new item has been added from the start of the array and the index position will change. So if there is no value for a key, then you will get undefined. So let's say I put color here, color. You notice that it shows me undefined because in an object, this is the key, this is the value. So if this is the key and this is the value, and both they are called the properties of an object. So if the property does not exist, then there will be no value. It shows you undefined. So that is when we use an object. So just like in an object, you can also add items to an array even after you have declared them. It will still work. So for an array, we'll be needing that. I think I forgot to do that. So let's learn how to add new item to an array. So remember, in this our array here, we have 4 items, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I want to add on another item to it called, let's say, the color of the user. You see the person in black, white. So you can do that by saying user info.color should be equal to black. So you notice here, before I added this black, if I put my user info, this is what it will show. But after I finish adding it, you notice that value will be added. So here I have 4 items in the array. One, two, three, four. Then now I have this here. So user info black. So that is, it's meant to increase to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's showing me 4 because of the reference property. Okay, so that is not black. Okay, let me put this first. So I still have 4. Okay, so oh sorry, that is not how I would have done it, and that's why I'm getting that odd result. So for a user info, to do that I need to dot push. So I want to add from the end, just use dot push. So that was why I was getting that odd result. I use the method for adding for an object in an array. So before now, this is the value in the array, and now I've added, and let's see. So it's going to give us the right result. So it's meant to be 4 here, then here it shows you 5. Okay, so this is how we add a new item. So if I want to also delete from an array, as a user info dot pop. So if I say pop, it's going to delete the last item too. So if I bring that down, it's going to pop it off. Okay, so if I want to add from the start of the array, I think I use on shift. So you see it brings back on shift. So all these array properties, they are all in W2 School, so you can practice as much as you want. So this is how we can add values to an array after it has been created. But now, how do we add to an object after it has been created? So make a comment. So adding values to an array. After creating. So the same thing here, adding values to an array after creating. So instead of values, I just say is the properties. For an array, it should be, the right word should be adding items, and for here I should be adding properties. So to do that, before I will add new properties to the array, let's see what to the object. Let's see what the object looks like. So I'm going to have console.log profile. So this is what the profile looks like. Then I'll now add color. So I'll say profile dot color should be equal to white. So Mr. Chile is now a white man. So console.log profile so if I do this, you notice before we added this, there is no color, but now we now have a color. So what if you want to add more than one properties at a time? So you can do that using the object.assign. So there are many properties in W2 School, so just play around with them. So let's do that one. So let's say I want to add a color and height at the same time. So I'll say profile dot the object dot assign, then the first value that you have to pass, or the arguments you pass, is the object that you want to assign. So for this our case is profile. Then in bracket I need my color should be white, then height should be 6.1 feet. So that should be FT. So if I do this, you notice I'm going to have all of these added. So for here I have my height 6.1 feet, my color white, then for here I also have this. So object has has something called a reference method. So if you update an object at the bottom, it dynamically updates. So that's why you're seeing that. It's like once I update a value here, then whatever was referencing that object before dynamically updates. So it's like a live update. So an object has that behavior. So that is why even though the update took place here, it's also reflecting here. So that's why you're seeing these two here. But an array does not do like that. So that is it for an object. So with this, we've come to the end of our class for today. We have done the review of some of the basic JavaScript topics that we'll be using. Now lastly, just remember that now let us talk about the structure. We are going to be using this in our Node.js. So this structuring. Now the structuring has to do with the fact that a function is returning more than one value at a time, and for some reason, let's say the object returns like 10 values at a time, and you don't want to use all the things it returns, you just need only one. So how do you just extract that one and use instead of using one? So it's like you have a toolbox and you just need maybe an electrical toolbox or a medical toolbox, anything like a toolbox. You just need one tool from inside. So instead of emptying the toolbox, like pointing it upside down, get that tool, then you now rearrange. Why not just open the toolbox, pick that one and close? Then if you need to, just put, so that when you are done, you just return one item or two items that you need. So that is what the structuring does. It helps us to extract a value from a function that is returning more than one. So we know that a function is a block of code that carries out a particular action, and once that action has been ended, it stops. So let's say, for example, I need a function that will get me the sum of any two numbers, their product, and yeah, just the sum of product. So I can put a function here, say function get sum and product. So I have my A, B. So I put here return. So I put here const let sum be equal to what? A plus B. Let product be equal to A times B. Then I'm going to return A product sum. So now let's say I want to use this function now, and I come here, I will say const so let's say from this function I just need the sum to carry out a different action. So I just get my sum equal to get sum product. So I'll have my 2 and 8. So 2 plus 8 will give us 12, 4 times 8 will give us 4 plus 8 first will give us 12. Then 4 times 8 will give us 36. So for now I just need the sum. So how will I do that? To show that I've gotten the sum, I'll get my sum. So if I do that and save, I'll get my sum is 12. Now this is the structure. Now instead of me to just unload everything, so let's assume I didn't do this. I'll just put result here, or just put it as sum, and then you'll see what will show here. You notice it's going to show me the product and what sum as an object. So that means if I need to use this, remember I'll just learn object, so I'm going to do dot sum before I can use it. But now because we are destructuring, we don't need to pass through this process. So just put that curly bracket, remove this part, and it's going to also work the same way. Good. So if I also need the product part, I can now come and do product, and I also get the product. So that is the structure. So if I'm returning like 12 items or like 12 results, the same principle apply. As long as you know the value that you are expecting, is it product, is it sum, is it any value that you are returning, is it the HCF, is it the factors, you just structure them. So if it doesn't exist, then you get undefined. Now there's another way that you can destructure, and that you usually use when the order of return is important. Like if you notice here, I return in this order. This is my product and this is my sum. But when I'm destructuring it, I use sum and product, and yet the result is still the same. This is the sum, this is the product. But when you return in square bracket, so for example I put here now return square bracket product sum. So when you use square bracket, the order of return is very, very important. Now if I leave it like this, we'll definitely have an error. So that also teaches us something. Undefined. This means that when you are returning with a square bracket, you have to destructure with a what? Square bracket. If you are returning with a curly bracket, you destructure with curly bracket. So I have to change this. Now when I change this, if I'm expecting that it's going to show me like 12 and 32, then I'm wrong based on what I've explained earlier. So it's going to reverse it. It's going to show me 32 and 12 because it is expecting that this position should hold the product. So even though here I'm using sum, that is not how it expects you to destructure it. So it's expecting here to be the product and here to be the sum, and that's why here you get the product and here is sum. So this is just how we destructure, and we are going to be using this something similar, or you're going to be seeing something similar in our Node.js, more especially when we are dealing with importing packages, both our own external modules and the ones that are inbuilt in Node.js. So I believe with this review, with this few brush up, remember I didn't teach JavaScript. I just explained some of the few concepts that you will be seeing applied as we enter our backend next week. So please do well to watch the video. If there's any part you don't quite understand, perhaps before the next class, you can ask your questions and I'll try my best to answer you as much as I can. So that is how we have it for today. See you in our next class.